All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining the webinar session this afternoon. So welcome, and we do appreciate your time joining the session today. So my name's Chris Ackland. I'm a solution architect at GE Vernova, and you'll also see we've got Glenn Smethurst on the webinar here with us today as well. So Glenn is our Global Smallworld Product Manager, and Glenn, we certainly appreciate your time. I know it's pretty early over there in the UK, so thank you very much for joining. So again, thank you. Glenn's going to be running through most of the presentation today. So Glenn's going to talk a little bit about the Smallworld Roadmap, including Smallworld 6, including items such as new field apps, Smallworld 6 that will be coming, and also doing a bit of a recap as well as to the product changes released in 2024 this year. So that's the agenda. We've got 1.5 hours. Glenn is going to talk through his slides for about 1 hour, and we're going to leave about 30 minutes towards the end of the session for Q&A. So during the webinar, just some housekeeping items. Now, if you do have questions, and we would encourage you to fire some questions at us, there's a little, you should see a little Q&A window on your screen, so you can type some questions into that window. And as we go through, Glenn, myself, Doug Moore, we will be trying to respond to those questions either through the chat or through the microphone and the audio. So we'll pick some questions to answer as we go through. So feel free to drop some questions in, and we'll do our best to answer during the call or after. During the session as well, we're going to have 2 polling questions, so halfway through and towards the end of the webinar. So look out for those polling questions. So I think one of them's they're both multiple choice questions, so you can select those. And we'll review the answers from the audience as well. So that'll be a bit of fun. And the last housekeeping item, so we will be recording this session. There are some customers over in New Zealand unable to attend because it's getting a bit late over there. So we will record the session, send out the details for the team afterwards as well. So once again, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining. And at this point, I'll hand over to Glenn, who will go through the presentation. Thanks very much, Glenn.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody, for joining or listening to the recording. What I'm going to do is spend an hour talking about what's been happening with Smallworld and what's happening in our new world of GridOS. So I'm going to start off giving you a little bit of introduction into what GridOS means in a very biased, blinkered way for Smallworld. So there are lots of resources from GE Vernova about the introduction of GridOS, which happened a couple of years ago. But I am not going to assume that everybody's seen all that or necessarily appreciates what that might mean for the geospatial part of the portfolio. And also, you might not be aware that it applies to all the industries that we serve. So given the name GridOS, it sounds very electric oriented. And indeed, that's its origin. So one of the ways that we pitch about how our customer space is changing is in terms of the electric industry. So once upon a time, yesterday, not literally yesterday, but a few years ago, fundamentally, networks go through, energy was generated, transmitted, distributed, and then consumed. So that was the model, and GE had systems that allowed you to manage that. So fundamentally, that was the model. Where we are today, though, is a lot more complicated. So in effect, there are renewables, there are microgrids, there are customers are no longer just customers, they're prosumers. So we can't rely on a sort of simple management approach at each of those different tiers. So in response to that, we termed this approach called grid orchestration, which fundamentally says, well, you can't just manage things in different tiers, but you've got to look at a much more coordinated approach across the systems that are required to operate that utility space. that is going to require integration of systems. It's going to increasingly want high levels of automation with modern technologies to streamline that process. And you want to move to from a more proactive to from a reactive approach to a proactive approach to deal with the inherent stability. So that you would have instability you'd have in a network where there's not just that more complicated generation model, but also the impacts of weather, unfortunately, cyber threats and other disruptions. So that's the reality of that. So what GE did is 2 years ago was launched the first software portfolio designed for grid orchestration. And that's got some fundamentals to that, which are actually important to all our domains. So fundamentally, it's security. So pretty much all the customers we support operate at some level, some critical infrastructure. So that's not just electric. It's obviously any sort of energy, water, and telecom as well. So security has to be there for things to just work. You can't have management systems which are compromised by a cyber attack. So this fundamental approach of this platform is how do we get data out of individual systems, out of their silos that we often use, and have a consistent network model available to everybody who is using that within the organization. Of course, there are applications. And we're increasingly using AI and machine learning. So we're seeing intelligent grid applications. And there's also a shift to much more cloud deployments or hybrid. So things on premise or even on edge to in combination with more and more cloud systems. That's the sort of reality that we're seeing. So that's a sort of general initiative behind the GridOS platform and the systems that make up of that. So if we look at GE's offering and where the systems have, we basically we organize ourselves into sort of three main pillars, which we call plan, operate, and transact. So plan is fundamentally what are the applications and the data sources that allow you to design and extend your network and analyze it. So that's actually the space where Smallworld is, and I'll talk about Geo Network Management a little bit. But then obviously we interface with across a data fabric to systems that allow you to operate the network and transact in the case of electricity. So that plan, operate, and transact are our key pillars. But there is this portfolio, which we launched a couple of years ago. And this year, beginning of this year at Distributech, we announced another piece of it, which is the data fabric. So that common platform on GridOS is how GE is building applications which meet some of those critical capabilities that we need for that. And they run on a hybrid cloud infrastructure. So if we zoom into that plan portfolio, there are a good number of applications in there. And Smallworld is the network lifecycle part. So you will see that in that plan portfolio, electric, gas, telecom, and water. And I want to stress that it is all of those domains, will continue to be all those domains. And that's a key part of this plan portfolio, and I'll explain why. But it's been joined with other tools, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on when we've talked about what's been happening with Smallworld and things like that, which are a lot more workflow oriented around how do I design, update networks, both in maybe a web and offline environment, true field applications. And there's quite a big focus on that. We're seeing more and more of our workflows being originated in the field or need to be field enabled, and in environments where there aren't necessarily good network coverage. And some analytics applications which are really using that high-tech AI and ML tooling, so visual intelligence and DDLR are part of this portfolio. So we sit in this environment where we're providing models to all of these systems. So that still sounds quite electric oriented, but if we were to look at maybe another domain, telco, we look at what some of the modern drivers for that, and we see organizations like Telemanagement Forum is driving some changes to the next generation of how we support OSS and BSS. So people going from building, especially fiber, to an operating thing. So there are some key fundamentals there. And these match really quite well to what that GridOS initiative that happens to come from the sort of energy side of things. But there actually is a pretty good mapping between what we see in influencing the telco market as well. So fundamentally, we need to automate using tools like open APIs. So how do we use that? Cloud technology. So it's not just moving away stuff from managing your own infrastructure, but how do you take the much more elastic nature of the cloud? So how do I can scale up, do high availability and disaster recovery, given what now cloud providers are able to give us? If we look at Agile, how do we get much more responsive change from our IT systems? So as new challenges come up, or as new market demands come up, especially in telco, how do we go from the IT systems that don't support that to supporting that at a much, much shorter time frame? So having agile techniques with common delivery approaches is fundamental. And as I mentioned earlier, telecoms is another area which we consider a critical national infrastructure. So after power, you pretty need internet and connectivity as soon as you can, and you need that to even restore the power. So security is fundamental in that part of it as well. So still there, fundamentally this boils down to time, where we know we need to have integration system of systems. If we've got lots of manual data entry, then data transformation initiatives impact the time to value. Cost. So increasingly, the value of a network model or network inventory, if you use telecom terminology, is causing some cost because there is not inaccurate network data. So getting that right is becoming more and more fundamental, and that leads into how can I innovate again. So if you've got incorrect data or systems that don't talk to each other, it's very difficult to automate those processes. So get away from those silos. So fundamentally, GridOS and its capabilities are very applicable to all our domains, not just electric, despite the name. Now, inside of GridOS, as I mentioned, was this network lifecycle suite of products, which is how Smallworld continues to evolve. And if you think about it, what the fundamentals of what Smallworld has done for a good number of years, 30 years that I've been here, is very good at modeling that network model data and providing that across to GridOS. So it's a very fundamental piece of that plan pillar of GridOS and how we provide that information across to the other parts of the solution. So it's fundamentally good at physical logical documentation of the as-built network, and that's a very key piece to be able to share across what we now term as data fabric. It's also where we do future design work, where we do as-built updates and quality management. And we have tools for manage that network modeling, and on the energy side, we have SIM model orchestration. But we no longer really look at that as like a number of systems that we integrate. It's fundamentally we're bringing that part of this data fabric. So it's a key enabler for us, and why Smallworld is important to GridOS. So that's a bit of a blinkered view of what GridOS is from a Smallworld perspective and why it's important. I'm going to talk a little bit now in sort of right down the level of Smallworld itself. And you may have seen diagrams like this before, which is our release train. So where we are now at the end of 24, we're about a week away from releasing sort of 5.3.5, which is our penultimate feature release of the 5.3 stream. And also, there is also this update release that we did in September for the 5.2 stream. What you can see, though, is that next year we're getting to the horizon where we've got a next major version, Smallworld 6. So that's a key bit of what I want to talk about a little bit later. But let's sort of recap the last 12 months. So we go 5.3.5 just coming up, 5.3.4 the middle of this year, and 5.3.3. So I've got some slides here or material, which is actually available in the documentation set. So anybody who's got the Smallworld documentation links will have this. And there's individual releases have their videos in them. But let's run through some of that content before we talk about Smallworld 6 and what's happening in 25. So as part of our spin-off, we're now GE Vernova since April time. We rebranded a number of our products and part of sort of GridOS. So you'll see that Smallworld is joined with this Geo Network Management name. So previously we just talked about Smallworld. Now we tend to have a prefix to Geo Network Management, and that's in recognition of what I just talked about. Is fundamentally Smallworld is a great platform for providing that network model around all the operating systems that a utility or telco might need. So we've done some mechanics of changing some the product names at the beginning of the year, but this is a very transparent in terms of the application. There's no changes to the product structure or code. It doesn't change your customizations. It's just a consistency with the GE Vernova branding. So the documentation has a different look and feel. And this has got a slightly different URL, but this really introduces this new naming and the importance of Geo Network Management as we come through. So that happened in the 5.3.3, 5.3.4 release in the middle of the year. So you're going to see products like Electric Office is now Geo Network Management for Electric, and that's all sort of covered in here. In the work that we did in the last 12 months, there's been a lot around keeping our platform up to date with things like OSS, and security type things. In fact, we had some customer requests around how do we extend our data store technology so it uses modern encrypted authentication support and things like that. So there's quite a lot of work in Smethurst, which is our data store server, really at the bottom end of our architecture, really deep in the technology layer of that. So that was actually a piece of work that originated in 5.3.3, but it's had continual increments in 5.3.4, where we did some additional validation on Linux. And in the 5.3.5 release, which is coming out next week, we've got also some validation on Windows there as well. So this is really, again, outside the system, but it's a very important one because it allows us to integrate with various identity mechanisms that just up until now, up until 5.3.3, we fundamentally had our own proprietary authentication, or you use something called Active Directory and LDAP. Now we can authenticate within a number of systems, and we support a SAML identity provider. So that is very useful if you're sharing your small deployment with web applications where it doesn't make sense to have Active Directory for external users or contractors as well. So it's a key capability. And that is in the core platform, right in the base of our core platform. So it affects, it's available to all our parts of the portfolio. Another key piece that we've had for a long time was an integration with SAP. We have a product offering for that, which is called Smallworld Business Integrator. And that's been become pretty fundamental to how some of our customers work, particularly on the utility side, where they are treating Smallworld as that model of an as-built network, and in some cases it's the originating system of where data is coming into about new assets, and that needs to be synchronized to SAP. So that's actually been available for about 15 years, and GE's kept investing on it. Now, in the last year, we've done some fairly significant updates to that. A little bit behind the scenes, because what it is we can run parallel synchronizations for different data sets. And what that allows you to do is, for customers who are using this with very large volumes of data change from both from Smallworld or from SAP, if they're making large attribute changes in SAP, they were getting to the point there's so much information to synchronize between the two, they needed a way of chunking it up. So we'd be able to do that by running synchronizations across different data sets. So customers who have electric and gas as separate data sets, they can run those. And equally, we can also take the server part of that and run it into a Kubernetes cluster, which is this cloud native approach of running server technology that we use across GSS. Why that matters is that there's a lot more flexible scheduling for those specific data sets. We can get some more performance and availability, and fundamentally it reduces that time taken for that sort of synchronization. So that was some work that started in 5.3.3 at the end of 24. But it's also been joined by working a little bit more closely with SAP, and where some of their customers are starting to use the geospatial parts of SAP itself. So there is a geo framework in SAP these days, and as people have moved to the S4 suite, that's starting to get some traction, that people are wanting to use that. So what we've done is allow us to put Smallworld map layers inside SAP, so that's directly available. So we've got the information that we already synchronize using SPIA, but then we can also provide base map data into the SAP Spatial Data Explorer. So we start, as I say, we're starting to see some customers who want to use this environment for geospatially planning their maintenance activities in SAP. So as we just sort of run through quickly what's happening in some of the other parts of the portfolio on top of Smallworld Core, which is the bit that I product manage, but I'll briefly recap what's happening across the other verticals, and also getting ourselves used to these new names. So we abbreviate Smallworld Geo Network Management for electric into GNME. I've just seen a question which I just want to address now, because it's about SPI and that. So before I go back on that, so what SPI versions were the changes that I'm talking? So we actually introduced these in 5.3.3 at the end of 23, and there was an update in 5.3.4. So those changes have happened in the back part of 24. So they're already released. You can look at the documentation. You can see those. So they're the capability. That's quite loosely coupled. We've had one customer who particularly asking for this have taken this off and put it in an earlier version of their software. But that's release capability already. You can go and look in the documentation. There's also a question with integration for Maximo as you do SAP. So we certainly have Maximo integration capabilities, not quite as extensive on the map integration piece. So that's happening on sort of similar technology. We haven't got the same level of certification as we do with SAP. So certainly capable to be able to do the Maximo integration. We don't go at this point in time. We don't do the same level of integration with certification with IBM Maximo. We'd like to change that, but yeah, certainly capable to do Maximo integration and heading to the idea that we get to sort of equivalent to what we can do with SAP. The other thing that's changing in this space is that certainly SAP has a platform which plays well with the data fabric, which they call the business technology platform. So they are another example of somebody saying, well, we want to move away from these sort of applications integrations to a much more orchestrated approach. So we are looking in doing proof of concept right now for release into the end of next year, is how do we take our GridOS platform, that Smallworld data, and using connecting that across the business technology platform. Okay, so I'll just go back to a recap of what we're doing in the other parts of the application. So the product formerly known as Electric Office, so is now GNME, or Geo Network Management for Electric, has some increments into the way it manages and models circuit builds, and then what are normally energized. So this is particularly important. How do we get that accurate representation of the available equipment? And also, how do we automatically set some phase them? So there was some manual overhead in if you wanted to capture network which isn't normally energized. And of course, that's important when you want to send that across to ADMS. So the companion product to GNM for Electric, GIS Adapter, has the ability to, has been extended to have relationships between the circuits and proposed network objects, and also include about that to make that available across to the ADMS. As our ongoing work through our releases, we're doing a lot of work on certification testing. So what that means across the 3 releases that I'm talking about for 5.3, 5.4, and next week's 5.5, is that we're validating across all the GE versions of that type. And there's a big jump from the ADMS Series 3 versioning to 3 to 16 as part of that portfolio. But that's actually a significant piece of work that GE is doing and standing up environments to test all of those. And that feeds into another GridOS concept, which is quite important. It's like, how do we pre-integrate and test these? And we've got a piece of terminology that I'll talk about at the end of the chat, of the webinar, where we're talking about evergreen. So you're going to see more and more of GE is pre-testing and pre-building solution environments which get closer and closer to mapping to what the customer needs. This is a good example of where we're doing that. We also have Geo Network Management for gas, what was previously Gas Distribution and Transmission Office. So we've got some additional parts of the data model for regulatory compliance around valves, and some high consequence analysis location management tools for pipeline data models. On the distribution side, there's a new service reporter, which allows you to look at service line hierarchy. So why that matters is reporting on service connection points for gas distribution. So previously, this could result in over-reporting on services. So that's been addressed with some additional models. And on the telco side, there's been a key piece where the network update product, which is a web application system, a connected one for looking at object inventory, we can now use the display the entered network equipment, so what's the linear structures as underground routes, and view details of that inside that. So particularly in the telco space, we're providing more of this capability onto the web application network upload is a key part of that. So the other, where are we? We're getting to about halfway through the session. That's quite good. The final piece that I want to talk about in terms of product releases and the work that's going on and how that sits into GridOS is that those cloud deployments are very important. So we started certifying on AWS and Azure in the 5.2 series of Smallworld, and that's been continued all the way through 5.3. But what we've also done this year is we've got very close with some of the big system integrators and the hyperscalers of AWS and Microsoft. So what you will now see if you go onto AWS or Microsoft marketplaces, you will see these products on there with some of their deployment options, and you can even request a purchase through that, and that might be useful if you've got consumption metrics with either of those hyperscaler providers. So another key thing about GridOS and how Smallworld's positioned in that is that we we've got a lot of people playing into that partnership ecosystem. So that's a key thing, and a representation of that is obviously what you see on the on those marketplaces. So we've covered a little bit of what GridOS, why Smallworld's important to GridOS, some of the mechanics, what we've done in the 12 months. So before we really talk to what we're doing in Smallworld 6, we've got a little bit of a poll, which I'm going to flick to now. So get ready for this. You'll get a countdown, and I'll answer any questions while we do that. So I'll just talk through these questions about, do you have plans to upgrade and implement new functionality in the next 12 to 18 months? And we've got new 4 options there. Hopefully, they will be visible to you, and we'll give you a count on that. Now, whether you're looking to upgrade the existing system to the latest version, take advantage of some of this new functionality with a bunch of these desktop applications. We've got these new data model capabilities, in particular on the electric and the gas sides, but also whether you want to look at additional functionality, you can take as many of those as applicable to you. Whilst that's going on, there was another question on SBI. So, can SBI integrate with Maximo, or is there a different product, was asked. So we tend to do the integrations with Maximo natively with GSS, Geospatial Server, which is related to SBI, but we tend to do that with Geospatial Server. There are a few different options, but that's a key one to know. Okay, so I think your countdown is there, so that I think we will get the result of that. So, yeah, great. We're seeing upgrading in the next 12 to 18 months. A good metric was that, so strong for upgrading to the latest version, taking advantage of new desktop capabilities, the data model, but also looking at the web and mobile. Fantastic, great. So that should be live and capture that. So thank you for all doing that. We'll have another poll question towards the end of the webinar. Okay, so let's look a little bit about Smallworld Geo Network Management 6 and something called VMDS Cloud. So this is really the defining feature of our next major release. So this is our progression through our feature releases. We've got one more planned for 2025 for the 5.3 series, and that should get us to long-term support. That's envisaged to primarily be some updates to some underlying open source software. It's quite important to keep up to date with that, the security threat. So we envisage that there's going to be one more release, which is hopefully end of Q1, maybe April. We're just finishing up the planning around that. But then we're heading towards an end of the year, Smallworld 6 2025, with an evolution to the database, which I want to talk about. So underpinning Smallworld is something called Version Management Data Store, VMDS. And I don't think I'm understating it it's been a key contributor to Smallworld's success over the last 30 years, because it's been the most scalable platform to geospatially document complex networks. So it's been a foundation for the Smallworld product for more than 30 years. Continual improvements for performance and security. As you've just seen, over the last 12 months, we've done a ton of work on improving some of the authentication encryption methods around Smallworld. So keeping up to date the latest securities and the deployments of that, whether it's on cloud native technology like Kubernetes. So that's a key piece of this. And what it allows people to do, and maybe you just take this for granted if you're looking at the applications on top of it, is it allows literally thousands of concurrent users to perform geospatial updates and resolve conflicts at the same time. So that's not a theoretical user population, that's thousands of users doing that at the same time. So from everything we know, that is still a market-leading capability. That said, we don't ever sort of stand still. So we are looking at VMDS next iteration to be called VMDS Cloud, and it continues by providing all of these VMDS qualities, which are fundamentally how do we take that version management and a network-based geometry model and put those on top of industry standard relational database. So PostgreSQL is our target for that. So why are we doing that? So we're seeing more and more of a trend in our evolution of Smallworld, and it is very evolutionary, is how do we take from what was initially proprietary technology to mainstream IT. So in the case of databases, we're very aware that something like PostgreSQL is well understood for IT departments. How do you do high availability, disaster recovery, those types of tooling? So that's a known quantity with PostgreSQL. So taking advantage of that is quite key. When we look at cloud providers, I talked about AWS and Azure as environments that we deploy on. There's an interesting trend to provide managed databases available from those services, so you don't have to update your versions or have backups. Or the other thing that VMDS Cloud on PostgreSQL deployed at a future point on one of these managed services, that you can take advantage of things that these cloud providers do, which is difficult to replicate in your own environment necessarily. So how do we have replication across availability zones or even regional zones? So there is a key capability that we're seeing from these hyperscalers, which has been is new territory for a lot of people. And then the other thing is that VMDS Cloud is a key component in GridOS data fabric. So what I'm attempting to say is the importance of that ability to get that model directly available across all these data silos is something that we're investing across all of the products that Vernova builds. So I've got a couple of questions around this, which I'll address as we go through, around how this relates to PostGIS and PostgreSQL. But I think that's probably best addressed by talking a little bit about what it is and what it isn't. So what we're in this sort of very high level architecture, we've got on the left-hand side what we currently develop and build and have in our Smallworld suite, which is fundamentally the majority of access is through a Magic application, so our desktop applications, what was formerly known as Electric Office and P&I. And that has a significant investment in those products. So both by GE, where we own and maintain millions of lines of code for those applications. And to be fair, probably an equal amount is existing in partner and customer sites as well. So there's a lot of investment in those applications. So what we're doing is we're effectively taking the persistence from our proprietary layer, the bottom layer of this diagram, which is Smethurst and VMDS, and its communication over data, 4K data blocks, to fundamentally on the right-hand side, where we are doing communication in SQL, but SQL with extension, additional concepts that we get from Smallworld. How do we get our version managed indexing, conflict resolution, those kind of things, and our geometry model. But it's all happening at a layer below the application. So I will show you some screenshots. We are not changing the application at all to enable this. So we call this lift and shift. We're fundamentally taking the persistence layer of Smallworld and putting an additional option to put on PostgreSQL. So what this isn't, this on its own is not PostGIS. So PostGIS, for those of you are aware, is an extension to a well-used extension to PostgreSQL for the what is an OGC standard of simple feature geometry, and which is a very good tool for expressing geospatial things, but it doesn't understand things like our version management. It doesn't have any of that kind of concept on it, and it doesn't have the more complex network geometry, which is important to Smallworld. So what we're doing here is putting those intelligent smarts on top of PostgreSQL, so we can run our applications with those capabilities in. Now, PostGIS itself is a useful tool, and we are increasingly using that alongside this in GridOS. And I've got when we get to the field applications bit, I'll talk a little bit about how we're using that there. So you won't be, one of the common questions is we're not trying to enable people to directly use PostGIS via this approach, but will be in it's a sort of companion work on that. So I saw that question from Barris. There's another question from Ryan, which was, is there a publicly available interface spec for interacting with or building functionality around GridOS? So I'm not sure publicly available is the right term, but we have a product part of the portfolio which joined GridOS called GridOS Connect, which is fundamentally a very capable product as part of that data fabric, which allows us to integrate with a whole number of systems as an integration point. That is available as part of data fabric, has a whole bunch of adapters to get your data into the data fabric, and then the partnership side of GridOS, which is not there right now for all our customers, but is very quickly coming, is how do we build some of these applications ourselves, or indeed self-serve data for build some solutions using data fabric tooling for the targeted data scientists. So that's capability that's coming along for that. It's not truly public. You have to have access to these systems at this point to be able to build that, but that's clearly where we're going. And there's another question about JavaScript, which I will talk to as we go through the slides here. So where are we on this VMDS cloud and this PostgreSQL? So here's a visual of a Smallworld application, and inside there, it is the same test application, the Cambridge database that we often use for testing combinations of data model. Now, the only change in this application is that the version dialog here is referencing a data set which has got this name PGGIS. So this is a PostgreSQL backed version of VMDS. So this is VMDS Cloud. And inside it is quite exciting if you're into your technology, because you can see there are alternatives and their checkpoints. So we've got the version management capability of Smallworld inside PostgreSQL. So PostgreSQL itself doesn't have this capability at all. But once we've got this, then we can build that together with our geometry. We can then wire in our application capability. So the way that we do this, there is a new VM SQL dataset manager for handling this PostgreSQL data, and that allows us to make database connections and then manage it in this environment. And it gives us the benefit of alternatives. So no limits to alternatives in the same way that Smallworld currently does. So it's not like a simplistic branching mechanism that maybe, for example, Esri has a single level of branching. It's fundamentally got the capabilities that we're used to inside Smallworld. Yeah, and we can edit objects and geometry as normal and not changing the application. So that's what we're showing on these screenshots. So fundamentally, there is an application here with VMDS Cloud data storing, which is unchanged, which is really important to some of our capabilities, that we can introduce this to customers without having to re-engineer their applications or their customizations. So just to recap the goal of this, and I'll tackle some of the questions that are coming up. So transparent, no impact on the magic applications. We're calling it VMDS Cloud because our goal is to get to the point that we want to make available at some point on managed services from cloud vendors. But it's still going to be available on premises, of course. But we want to standardize the admin, scalability, replication capabilities that Smallworld has with PostgreSQL equivalents, which are well understood. But of course, this is only worth doing if we can keep the scalability which made Smallworld successful the last 30 years. That's a key intrinsic capability that we need to have. On the right-hand side, there are some additional capabilities we're looking at for, which is secure data pipeline access to Smallworld data. At the moment, you have to access Smallworld via Magic, or GSA has its own VMDS adapter. So fundamentally, you get Smallworld data through those two routes. But we want to enable direct access from JavaScript applications when it makes sense. And that means RESTful APIs directly into Smallworld versions. And we want to do that as part of Data Fabric or standalone. One of these questions here is that's come up already is this going to be a mandatory change? So what we're looking at is this as being an option for Smallworld 6. So by the time we get to 6.0, we will have a choice of VMDS or VMDS Cloud. It will not be a mixture of data sets. That's probably an important clarification. So, but you can continue through the 6 series to continue to use VMDS. We're not forcing a change at that point. By the time we get to 6.1, that would be the anticipated change. There's lots of questions on this, which I'll just run through the final slide, and we will go through some of those questions. So where we are at the point, we're just getting a real functional release, which is available for GE internal people. And this is actually a piece of work that's been happening for a number of years already. So this is a big milestone for us. And then in Q1, we're going to do a limited availability and beta 1 release on the 5.3 series. Actually, already enablement part is in Smallworld 5 already. We are 5.3 already. But what we'll start to see as we get into the second half of next year is betas, which are effectively betas of Smallworld 6. So we're going to make that more widely available to GE development partners, a couple of joint testing customers in the first part of the year, and then a slightly wider audience in the second half of the year before we get to general availability. So there are some questions which I will kind of to cut through these. So let's see what order. Will these new items, there seems a couple of questions, when these items run in Kubernetes as a platform. So fundamentally, the way that we're developing this is we're just connecting to a PostgreSQL database. However, GridOS has a managed PostgreSQL deployment in its foundation. So what we'll be likely targeting for 6.0 is our initial deployment. It will run on a GridOS managed PostgreSQL, which will have a Kubernetes style deployment. That's an architectural decision. We're just validating at the moment. Fundamentally, what we're doing here doesn't require that, because it's we're just connecting to a PostgreSQL. But in terms of a product offering, what we think we'll get to next year is the GridOS platform provides a lot of the tooling around PostgreSQL, high availability running Kubernetes. DS transfer has come up in a couple of questions. So that is our mechanism for moving data from alternatives, and that is how we will take data from current DS files and alternatives into the versions inside PostgreSQL. So DS transfer is the transfer mechanism of that. So those of you who know it already understand it. Once we're inside PostgreSQL, there is less need to do compression. It's a lot more self-managing of that. So that's an interesting capability that as we run through next year, we'll be communicating more on how that has got some different characteristics, which are a bit more self-managing than current VMDS. So the performance of PostgreSQL, so this is something that we're monitoring literally on a daily build. So as we go through development, there are a number of things which are, not surprisingly, much faster, and some things which were a little bit off. So where we are now is not the final state, but in general, we're finding read transactions, in some cases, reasonably a step up from current VMDS. And some of the write pieces we're still optimizing. Bear in mind, we've still got a lot of next year is pretty much about performance and scalability. So there'll be lots of sort of communication as we go through this. Okay, so what I'll do. Oh, and the other piece that I just want to enter to talk to is about what we do with JavaScript. So JavaScript is tools like Geospatial Server, we're very good at creating RESTful APIs. And that will continue to be so, certainly into Smallworld 6. What we're also looking, though, is whether we can take some of these JavaScript ones and unbundle that even from GSS. So that's a bit of an internal driver to reduce the footprint of that. So it's not we're going to go straight from where we are now to having all of P&I's availability as a JavaScript customization. It's really about how do we get open API access into Smallworld and that. I've covered some of these questions already, which I've got on screen, so I'll just quickly up. But I just want to reiterate, and we talked about this a little bit with PostGIS earlier on. This is not about people going directly into, I no longer just take access Smallworld data via a G product. I can just directly go into SQL. There's some differences between the technology that people need to be aware of, because fundamentally SQL doesn't understand, or even PostGIS doesn't understand complex network geometry. So that's a model we've had to add. And it certainly doesn't understand alternatives and version data. So in the short term, that's all going to be via API layers. Okay. What I propose, I know Chris is checking me on questions and things, but what I propose, Chris, is that I will just talk quickly onto this next section of what we're envisaging for 2025, because I think that completes the picture. And then if there are further questions on coming back to VMDS Cloud or any of the topics, we'll take it there. Okay, so a key part of Smallworld in Smallworld 6 next year, I've just talked about. There are some other things, but VMDS Cloud is obviously the headliner and the reason we're calling it Smallworld 6. But the other thing is that we want to talk about, give you a high level, is this is in the context of us working on this plan portfolio, and that important part that Smallworld has that to enable that is fundamentally that. So the plan apps cover a number of things which I've mentioned a little bit here already. The portfolio covers AI, MI, analytic tools like visual intelligence, disruption, DDLR, dynamic line rating tooling. But there's a lot of work in the plans and some initial around how do we extend geo network management into the field. So when we look at our overall application release calendar, it's clearly a lot more than Smallworld. So a couple of highlights to this is that we're already working on tools which are field-based applications for damage assessment, and how do we assign work to damage assessors? And I'll give you a bit of a visual of what that looks at. So that's a product that's just about to be released and have its sort of first customer, and happens to be in the US. So that's a capability, and obviously it has its integration points with Smallworld via the data fabric. So that's a key capability in that. So what you're going to see in 2025 though is a build out of field applications, which are some of those workflows around inspect, survey, as build, view update. So this is a one way to think about it is an evolution of the current mobile enterprise products onto GridOS technology, which has some UI, UX focus as well. So that's a key step that we're working on. But this time around, we've got the benefit of GridOS field apps using UI, UX. So we are tackling this from the point of way of modular applications which are built on top of GridOS. And they actually access a number of data sources. The damage assessment needs to be able to talk to GIS as well as ADMS's applications anywhere, and we do that via the data fabric. And it's actually pretty agnostic to whether it doesn't have to be a GE ADMS, and it doesn't have to be a GE GIS, it doesn't have to be Smallworld. So in fact, one of the initial customers for that is aggregating data from Intergraph through that field application. So this is a real focus on this in the next few months, and certainly not by the end of 25. So the field damage assessment is spans the plan and operate portfolio, how it supports outage and switching. And what it looks like is, not surprisingly, a mobile application, but it's fundamentally a combination of a solution is a combination of a web application which assigns work and an offline capable application for damage assessors using network damage. And the way it's being fed is this data fabric thing. So it's got capabilities around easy to use data capture tools for usual things for like work locations, point lasso, high accuracy GPS in a mobile first application. But the key thing is this is BYOD, device support, and offline capable, because it's there to support where there is either damage is anticipated or has been happening. GridOS provides an application which assigns work to these things. So this is what a GridOS web-based application looks like. So this is how we create and manage field assignments, which will be picked up by this mobile application. So this initial scope is for this, this damage assessment workflow. It has tracking and statistics around what the different states of those assignments are. But what you're going to see is this will be expanded into a greater set of field applications through 2025, tackling those inspect, survey, and pre-design, those pre-design survey parts there. How this works is we are providing not only these applications but data products into the data fabric. So what you will see if you were looking into the architecture of this before, to get to an electric version of the damage assessment application, we're actually connecting to GIS data, Smallworld, Intergraph, whatever, into the data fabric. And inherent in there is in some ways, a simplified model of the electric capability, which is there to feed these field applications based on what they need. And that initially is fairly simplistic. It's about location and status of assets, but this will increment as we develop more capability to have connectivity, to support tracing, internal worlds, those kind of capabilities that you kind of expect from Smallworld. So the earlier question about if I want to do it with post-GIS is in here supporting some of those mechanisms. So the combination of the work that what we're doing with a small VMDS cloud and the data fabrics and network modeling capabilities provides this much wider access into this. So we're doing this for these field applications, but it also supports how we integrate with ADMS, for example. How do we integrate with an OSS system in telco? Those kind of things as well. So it's a fundamental approach. You'll see that we're building out these data products into the GridOS data fabric. So just conscious of time, because I've used an hour and a bit, I just got a couple more slides. We'll go to a poll, and then we'll go see what other questions I haven't answered, and we can get to that. So what we talked about a lot about GridOS, how Smallworld is contributing to that, an evolution of database which allows us to run this in modern environments, take advantage of mainstream IT from PostgreSQL. What I've just briefly mentioned there is that we're building these field applications, and that means that we have to bring that data into the data fabric, which is a fundamental building block of how we address the solution space that we want to tackle with GridOS. There is another piece to GridOS, which is which I touched a little bit on when we talked about GIS adapter and pre-building those. How do we take some of the cost out of these long upgrade cycles that customer have? So another fundamental thing, the way that GE is approaching GridOS, is how do we take advantage of modern CI/CD techniques to take out some of those reduce that duration of GE working on software, either new features or security updates, whatever required, into a pipeline that eventually gets to customers. We've got two flavors of this. We call this evergreen. The first one is probably what you expect is that G manages the whole lot to customer production environments. We call that evergreen production. So in effect, you can come to G or partner, G Vernova partner, and have a sort of hosted system. But equally, what's probably more interesting for people who don't want to do that is that we will host and pull solutions together, including customizations into a cloud version of that with some of your some representative data, and customizations into a pre-production environment, so a testing and delivery environment, we call it. And then we can look at saying, well, we can make that available so you can see what products that GE has in that solution environment with your customizations, if you want to engage with this. And then only at the point that you want to pull it into your test environment do you actually start doing it. The idea of this is that you massively compress that time to engage in upgrades from us releasing software to having it available to you at least into a pre-production one. And there's a significant dollar benefit in terms of having to run all those projects yourself. I think the other thing I would say is that fundamentally you can see the way that GE is building software is for this continual integration and deployment tools. That's what we've been doing for some years internally. We're reaching to the point that more and more customers want to be able to take that directly into this environment. So I did want to briefly talk about Evergreen before I get you to the final poll, and then we'll go back around and see what the questions that we have. So this is, we covered a lot of content here, still got a few more questions to do. So we'll hopefully want to ask is, would you like Vernova to run additional webinars in 25 on specific Smallworld streams? So I've been talking about core, but you wanted to look at telco, gas and electric as well. So yes, no, unsure feedback would be appreciated. So whilst that's going on, let's have a look at other questions I haven't answered. Yes, so there's quite a lot about VMDS, which I will look at. See if there's anything else. Are they all VMDS cloud? Right, okay, that's good. So actually one question from David, what is the future of mobile enterprise? So mobile enterprise is effectively being evolved into these GridOS field applications. So mobile enterprise has its own release schedule. It's continuing maintained. There's a release next week as part of the portfolio. But we envisage that things like the field applications, as they become more capable around going from damage assessment to inspect, collect, and as-built survey, that will become a logical successor to mobile enterprise. Why only telecom, electric, and gas network? So that's my bad. I did a slide with those data sets in. Fundamentally, GridOS will need, can have any of those data products built into that. So clearly our partners work on water and transport domains, so they can be in there as well. How far off is a build application for electric office? I might leave that to my electric focused compatriot colleague there, I think. What are the likely of outcomes for customers of the partnership between GV and AWS? So that's an interesting one. So AWS, some of you may not be aware, well, when we are also a customer as well as our technology provider. So they use it for fiber planning, of what's some of their control centers. So AWS. So what's likely to happen there, as I've talked about at least, is we're doing some code development, and the VMDS cloud one is an interesting one because they'd like us to do some testing on some of their managed AWS databases. So that's an example of we're doing that. It's a much bigger play than just Smallworld, though. It's right across GridOS and GE Vernova. So there's lots of potential sort of synergies happening with those cloud providers, both Azure and AWS. So that's, I think we're really only just starting on some of that stuff. That's kind of very interesting. But there is something you can go look at right now is, you can look at your quotas if you're and purchasing through the marketplace. It will be a way, as some of our product lines do more and more hosted capability. So, for instance, our visual intelligence product is hosted by GE on AWS itself. So the hybrid cloud nature of the IT landscape that we're addressing with GridOS is enabled by those. How will well, it's a couple of VMDS questions. Let's see the results of the poll. So fundamentally, there is a strong demand for more additional webinars on specific Smallworld streams. So that's really good feedback. That's really good feedback.
That is, yeah. So yeah, we will look to at that feedback and look to run some more focused sessions in 2025. So look out for some comms on that. And yeah, thank you very much for responding, Glenn. There's one question there as well. I see from the Gemini folks as far as beta releases of VMDS Cloud to test that. I think we're releasing some of that in 5.3.5, aren't we, Glenn?
So yeah, so there's some technical enablement which we're doing right now, and then there are a few. What we want to do is progressively make it available to more sort of customers with, clear understanding. It's not the finished article at this point. So I'm looking for a few relatively few customers who are representative in terms of who can have some of that close engagement in the early part of the year, which would obviously means that you'd be able to stand that up into a test environment, and we work with you. We won't be able to do hundreds of customers because that would be a big swamp on our engineering team. But progressively through the year, we will then make more betas available to people who could do that on their own with less than that. So I didn't do a call out today, but maybe I should have, to say if there is a customer who really, really wants to get into this and knows about PostgreSQL, then let the local team and myself know, and then we'll see at what point it makes sense to take on board with that. So we're really at the point that we're broadening it, knowledge within Vernova itself as we get to functional completeness, and then we'll start doing that. And then obviously by the end of next year, we're general availability.
Yes, so Glenn, I can see just in the comments there are some customers interested in that. So I'll perhaps Doug and I will reach out and have those conversations, and Glenn will be in touch to discuss.
Yeah, and we need to decide how to cut it. So we've got representation for different regions, different domains, and things like that as well. So yeah.
Glenn, there's another question around the field apps as well that you might see, the as-built app for EO, when that's going to be available. But my understanding, Glenn, is we're going to start releasing these apps next year, and that will sort of go into 2026 as well, right?
That's right. So this is kind of like the planning bits happening at the moment. The key milestone is that we get the damage assessment as our first field app on the new technology stack, which comes from GridOS. And I think the sequence is likely to be pre-design survey, and then as built as a subsequent version of that. But I think that's something we'll communicate more on, maybe on some of these webinars as well, as we focus on that. Yeah. So I think there's a very strong need in particular telco on the pre-design survey. So that might be the next one out of the gates, as it were. But yeah, we'll follow up in subsequent sessions of what that's looking like.
Take your pick there, Glenn. There's quite a few questions popping in, which is really good. So a lot of interest. I see some questions around VMDS Cloud performance and size, use of tools like DS Transfer as well.
Yeah.
which you've sort of touched on already.
I would suggest, Chris, we start at the bottom of the list. Start with 14. I think we've already answered some of these, and we kind of work our way up and tick them off as we go.
Yeah,
probably a good idea.
So yeah, the bottom question was, will this run in Kubernetes or as a platform or elsewhere for VMDS Cloud? So there will be options. The initial target is like to be GridOS PostgreSQL, which will run in Kubernetes. But then as we use more managed PostgreSQL, so what I mean by that is subscribing to AWS or Azure PostgreSQL, then clearly that's just a managed connection to that. Jim asked about what about client-side caching with VMDS Cloud. So yeah, so current VM Magic applications take where they get a bunch of their performance by having local transaction support, which is fundamentally in memory. So relatively recent work in Q3 was providing that as well. If you don't do that, you end up with lots and lots of sort of chatty conversations with PostgreSQL. So in effect, we took the model that Smallworld has currently with VMDS of having local cached records, which you then can operate them, and only at the point that you need to do a various type of transaction do you actually do that as well. So that's replicating what we're used to within Smallworld. There's a question about sizes. So PostgreSQL has I can't remember what it is now. It's something like 16 petabyte theoretical. Yeah, nobody has got a file system big enough for the largest PostgreSQL theoretical, so we're not seeing any limitation there. So that's not to say it wouldn't be, as it becomes, we talk a little bit more how it compresses on the fly, that isn't important, but fundamentally there isn't a PostgreSQL database size that we need to be as aware of, certainly with older versions of Smallworld. There's another question: I have network issues. Not sure if this addresses not VMDS Cloud. So the need about Swimmer. So one of the things that as a general topic here, is one of the things that we have addressed with things like replicas with VMDS is where there are poor network connections between that. Now, PostgreSQL has more options in some ways than current VMDS for this type of thing. But there's also fundamentally the option of, this is when the managed databases I'm running on cloud will look at. So our initial understanding looks like you could take the approach, and there was a customer I was talking to last week, that they're using Smallworld replicas because one data center was sufficiently close to one use. They had good connectivity, but not another group in another country. And they were effectively using replicas across the two. So PostgreSQL has capabilities like that too. But I think the other thing is there's an opportunity to look at it, well, if I put this in a much more managed environment that both of these ones could access with good internet connectivity, then that may be moving the problem away from the current VMDS solution. I think in short, there's a richer set of capabilities that we get from PostgreSQL than we do with VMDS. Where are we up to? Maris is asking about network.
There, oh yeah, sorry, you go, Glenn.
So network viewer will, because it's happening a lift and shift level, I don't envisage the network viewer itself would have any extra changes through VMDS Cloud. Itself, I think you're referring to the fact that GSS already uses PostgreSQL. We use PostgreSQL and PostGIS quite widely already in the stack as well. We use that for sort of caching capabilities. So the initial work that we're doing for 6.0 and VMDS Cloud doesn't try to rewire how GSS does some of those caching. Future steps, though, there's an interesting point here, is that we can, at the moment, what we do is that we take data out of VMDS and we put it in that, whether we can do it into a PostgreSQL database. Whether we can do that within the same environment is probably what you're thinking about. And that's certainly something we'll be looking at later on, but probably not 6.0.0 if I'm completely honest. Robert asked about VMDS Cloud handle. Oh, no, it's the list is changing. Does data growth rate lower compared to current VMDS? So what I understand, and this is still a piece that's we're getting more and more data on, is that as we remove alternatives in and checkpoints and tidy up and merge and post, what you should be doing inside Smallworld, the VMDS, the PostgreSQL implementation of that automatically recovers that. At the moment, in current VMDS, you have to DS transfer to reclaim the maximum space down. So that space management part of it, or record management part of it, looks like it's more efficient. Now, as we get more examples of that, we'll go through next year. We'll be able to quantify some of those benefits. Will the PostgreSQL database directly queryable? So this is the key thing. We will be via APIs and data fabric at this point. That's partly from limitations of PostgreSQL. Doesn't understand version management, and certainly doesn't understand our geometries. And in fact, some of the things like the table structures and whatever, they're not designed to, they need another layer to make it clear. Now, we have a view, if you want to directly query into like PostGIS or something like that, this is where the data fabric models of that, if you've got something that doesn't need to understand those things, we make that available through the data fabric of these GNME data products that we're talking to. So that's the combination of those things addresses a much more generic need. How will VMDS Cloud handle hot backup and copies? So that's native PostgreSQL capability. So that's one of the kind of benefits that we will get. So we don't have to do that from DS, our own proprietary tooling. That's one of our motivations of doing this. Can we describe how, Jim asked, how do we describe how field applications relate to the current suite of mobile applications? Is it a start from scratch approach? In terms of the applications, the GridOS field, some of the UI technology, and obviously the data fabric's new, so there's a lot of new stuff in there. If you were getting your data from things like SSM and Smallworld, that is being evolved into how we access some of that stuff into running into GridOS. So there may be some reuse of how you access some of those bits of it, but a lot of the GridOS field applications are using an updated technology stack from sort of mobile enterprise. And it's got a much wider use within inside GridOS than the mobile enterprise suite did, I think. I need to scroll up. How would it end? What will be minimum screen size or spec needed for the mobile? Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I know it's targeted at iOS, Android, and Windows operating systems, but I don't know what the minimum screen size or spec is, so we would have to follow up on that one. Do we expect Evergreen to be available for Australia anytime soon? I will again have to defer to somebody else, but that's a very good question. Yeah. Fundamentally, yes, it's coming. It's just when is it available in the region? it's true to say a couple of the initial customers have been in the US. Ben asked, is the GridOS platform a different product than the core GIS? Yeah, so GridOS is this larger platform that we're going to market with our entire portfolio of things, but there's a foundational part that Smallworld and core GIS is plugging into. So it is a different thing, but it's a fundamental capability as we start to see more products. So if I talked about SPI earlier, which is our SAP integration. The way that's evolving is that we'll have GridOS platform, SPI will run on. So over time, you'll see more and more parts of our product portfolios include that platform. That field damage assessment application will include that platform. So you'll see more and more of that. Baris has got lots of questions. With the new VMDS cloud, we'll see more intermediate GIS formats supported by GEV other than good old AutoCAD. Maybe PostGIS to show only the top alternative, or will FME be the de facto tool to get anything in out of Smallworld? So there's a few. I mean, certainly things like FME, GSA will continue to exist with VMDS Cloud. GSA obviously already does a good number of good things with PostgreSQL, and they will continue. I think the key thing is when you look at GridOS, there's a lot more common modeling around interchange formats, which are likely to be things like GeoJSON and things like that as well. And we provide, to make our field applications work, for instance, we're directly providing something called map-maps vector tiles as well as raster tiles. So what you're going to see inside GridOS, you'll be able to consume data, not just geospatial data, but you're going to consume them in a lot more standardized forms. So how we get information from things like AutoCAD and something like that, an entry point, and GridOS Connect helps there as well, but so does FME. But fundamentally, we want to get to the point that people can tap into the GridOS environment, the data scientists, and that it's very transparent whether the data actually came from Smallworld or whether it came from Intergraph. They're saying, well, how can I represent a feeder, for example, or a fiber, a circuit in electric distribution, and I want to access that data product, and it will automatically say, well, here's a GeoJSON which gave me this data for the circuit from last week, and the people using that are less aware of where all that data. They're more interested in how current is, well, its data quality and things like that, which is why that data product term means. That's quite a big topic to be able to answer in a single. It's a very good question, Barry. I think we probably need to talk more about that. As you'll see, probably as we go through more of these webinars, you'll see how it's playing out as that we're bringing these sort of data products and how you can consume some of those things.
Hey, now, Glenn, just thank you very much for you're doing a great job going through all these different questions. So thank you very much for that. We've got 2 minutes left, or now 1 minute. The clock is ticking down to the end of the webinar. So, Glenn, I'm sort of thinking we can perhaps Doug and myself and you can take these questions and we can get back to these individuals who have asked them after the webinar. Yeah, so we can do that, Glenn, given that the time is ticking down here. So
yes, good plan.
Yeah. So, Glenn, was there anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap this webinar up?
Only to thank everybody. We covered a lot. I can see there's a lot of questions. I apologise we haven't got all on the live session, so if we follow up on that. But just thank everybody for their engagement. That's been brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Glenn. You've done a great job. It's been a very informative session, and appreciate you getting up so early, and also to all the customers and partners who have attended this webinar. Thank you very much for your time. So we'll do our best to get the recording out and the material out in the next day or two, so look out for some comms on that. If you've got questions in the meantime as well, so as far as reaching out, Doug and myself, you've probably got our email addresses, and I think it might be here in the webinar interface somewhere. So you can reach out to us if you've got questions that pop into your mind after. And yeah, once again, just thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it, and look out for some webinars coming in 2025 as well. We'll wrap it up. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.